For 7 long years, my husband's annual solo fishing trip was the one sacred rule of our marriage I never, ever questioned. Every single June, Mark would pack his weather-beaten canvas duffel bag, kiss me gently on the cheek, and drive 5 hours north into the deepest, most unforgiving woods of Maine. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just pure, uninterrupted isolation. I trusted him with my entire soul. I genuinely thought he was just clearing his head from the crushing weight of his corporate job. But this morning, a tiny, high-tech piece of plastic completely shattered my life. I was tossing his cargo pants into the washing machine when a small silver disc slipped out of a hidden zippered pocket. An Apple AirTag. My brow furrowed as I tapped it against my phone, and the second the screen lit up, my heart completely stopped. The device didn't belong to Mark. It belonged to a woman named Chloe. And when I checked its location history, the truth hit me like a physical blow. It had never once been to Maine. It was pinging right now from a multi-million-dollar beachfront estate in the most exclusive neighborhood of Cape Cod. Before we dive deeper into today's story, I have a quick question for you guys. Which country are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's story is one you absolutely need to hear. My name is Elena. If you had met me a week ago, I would have told you that I was one of the luckiest women alive. Mark and I had been married for nearly a decade, and to anyone looking in from the outside, we were the absolute definition of a textbook suburban power couple. We lived in a gorgeous, sun-drenched colonial home in one of the quietest, most affluent neighborhoods in Connecticut. I ran my own boutique interior design firm, a business I built from the ground up that allowed me the flexibility to manage my own hours. Mark was a senior financial analyst for a major corporate firm, incredibly sharp, meticulously structured, and a man who took immense pride in his absolute discipline. We didn't have children yet, which was a conscious choice we made early on to focus on our careers, but we had a beautiful life, a comforting routine, and what I genuinely believed was an unbreakable bond built on total transparency. Every single summer, Mark's fishing trip was treated like a sacred, untouchable ritual in our household. He claimed it was the only way he could truly decompress from the high-stress, cutthroat environment of the corporate financial world. He would always leave at the crack of dawn on a Friday morning and return late Sunday evening, smelling faintly of pine needles, insect repellent, and campfire smoke. He always brought back pictures, sweeping views of pristine, glass-like lakes, dense forests of towering pines, and a tiny rustic log cabin he allegedly rented from an old local guy up there. I never had a single reason to doubt him. He was a doting, attentive husband who never came home late, never acted secretive with his phone, and was always entirely present, loving and supportive whenever he was home. But looking back now, with the devastating clarity that only heartbreak can bring, the warning signs were always there. They were just masterfully masked as quirky, endearing habits. For instance, Mark always packed his own bags. He wouldn't even let me help him fold a t-shirt, playfully claiming that he had a highly specific military-style packing system for the wilderness. He also insisted on throwing his clothes directly into the washing machine the absolute second he stepped through the front door after a trip, never leaving his duffel bag sitting around. And most importantly, he always insisted on driving his older, slightly dented SUV into the woods, instead of our brand new, highly reliable family sedan. His excuse sounded perfectly logical at the time. He claimed the unpaved, rock-strewn mountain roads up in Maine would completely ruin the suspension on the good car. I never questioned the logic. Why would I? You don't actively search for cracks in a foundation that you believe with your whole heart is completely solid. Our marriage wasn't just stable, it was envious. We hosted neighborhood barbecues, went on beautiful winter vacations to Aspen, and text messaged each other throughout the workday just to say we loved each other. Mark was the guy who remembered our anniversary down to the exact hour. The guy who surprised me with my favorite coffee on rainy Tuesday mornings. He played the part of the devoted, deeply in love suburban husband so perfectly that it deserved an Academy Award. I lived in that beautiful, comforting lie for 7 years, entirely blind to the fact that the man sleeping next to me every single night was a total stranger, wearing a mask so flawless that even the people closest to us never saw through it. The AirTag changed everything. The name Chloe was practically burned into the back of my eyelids. I sat frozen on the cold linoleum floor of my laundry room for what felt like a solid hour, just staring blankly at my phone screen as the blood completely drained from my face. Cape Cod wasn't some remote, rugged wilderness where men went to rough it out in the elements. It was an upscale, ultra-luxury coastal getaway for New England's elite. When Mark finally came downstairs for breakfast a few minutes later, looking sharp and professional in his tailored charcoal suit, I somehow found the strength to slip the AirTag into my pocket and act completely normal. I watched his every move with a sudden, terrifying intensity. I noticed how precisely he poured his black coffee, how smoothly he buttered his toast, and how perfectly calm his entire demeanor was. There wasn't a single flicker of guilt in his eyes. "All set for the big trip next week?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely casual as I rinsed a coffee mug in the sink. "Yeah, just the usual," he replied smoothly, not even looking up from his tablet screen. I honestly can't wait to disconnect. My brain is absolutely fried from these quarterly corporate audits. "No cell service again this year, right?" I asked, turning to face him. "You know how it is up in those deep woods, babe. Completely off the grid," he said, offering that familiar warm smile that used to make me feel so safe. "But I'll make sure to call you from that raggedy old gas station on the highway the second I'm on my way back Sunday afternoon." He stood up, walked over to me, kissed my forehead tenderly, and left for the office. The moment his car pulled out of our driveway, the sheer panic set in. My hands were shaking so violently, I almost dropped my phone as I dialed Sarah, my absolute closest friend since college. I didn't want to seem like some crazy, paranoid, hyper-jealous wife, but the cold, hard evidence was literally sitting in my hand. Sarah listened in stunned, breathless silence as the words spilled out of me, explaining the hidden AirTag, the woman's name, and the wealthy Cape Cod location history. "Elena," Sarah said, her voice dropping into a serious, urgent whisper, "you need to log into your shared cellular network account right now. Check the data usage on his specific line during last year's trip. If he's truly trapped in the middle of a dead zone in the Maine wilderness, his data usage should be absolutely zero for those 3 days." My chest felt incredibly tight as I opened my laptop and logged into our carrier portal. I pulled up the billing cycles for the past 3 years, specifically filtering for the second week of June. Sarah was completely right. During the exact days Mark was supposedly stranded in a rustic cabin without a single bar of service, his phone had consumed gigabytes of data. He wasn't in the wilderness. He wasn't disconnected. He was online. He was heavily active. And he was lying directly to my face. Every single memory of his past trips began to warp into something hideous. The pine scent on his clothes? Probably a cheap air freshener or a specific cologne. The photos of the lake? He could have downloaded them from Google or taken them years ago. The foundation of my entire adult life wasn't just cracking. It was completely turning to dust right beneath my feet. And I was left standing in the ruins of a decade-long illusion. The next 4 days were an absolute living hell. I was trapped inside a horrific psychological thriller of my own making, forced to play the role of the loving, utterly unsuspecting suburban wife, while my mind raced through every dark, twisted scenario imaginable. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. Every time Mark touched my shoulder or smiled at me across the dinner table, a wave of intense, physical nausea threatened to choke me. Was he living a double life? Did he have a secret family? Who on earth was Chloe, and how long had she been holding a piece of my husband's life in her hands? I knew that if I wanted to survive whatever wreckage was coming, I needed hard evidence. I couldn't just confront him with a random AirTag. A man as calculating and brilliant as Mark would easily spin a lie to cover his tracks. He'd claim he found it, or that it belonged to a coworker, or that it was a mistake. I needed undeniable, ironclad proof. On Tuesday night, while Mark was sound asleep beside me, his steady, rhythmic breathing filling our master bedroom. I slipped out from under the covers. My heart was pounding so loudly against my ribs I was certain it would wake him. I crept downstairs into his home office, the cold hardwood floor chilling the bottoms of my feet. Mark managed our primary investments, and on paper, our joint savings account looked perfectly normal. There were no massive withdrawals, no suspicious transfers, nothing out of the ordinary. But I knew him too well. He was a senior financial analyst. If he was hiding money, he wouldn't leave it where his interior designer wife could stumble upon it.
I began searching his desk, carefully opening every drawer, checking behind files, and scanning his bookshelves. Nothing. But then my eyes landed on the paper shredder in the corner. Empty. However, sitting right next to it was a sleek black leather briefcase he rarely used anymore. It was locked with a 4-digit combination. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing mind. What numbers would he use? Our anniversary? No, too obvious. His birthday? Nothing. Then I tried a sequence of numbers I had seen scribbled on a sticky note in his car a few months prior. The zip code of Chatham, Massachusetts, a wealthy town in Cape Cod. Click. The latches popped open. Inside, there were no secret bank statements, but there was a premium high-limit credit card issued solely in his name by a private banking firm. I pulled out my phone and took crystal clear photos of the card number, the security code, and the customer service line. The very next morning, utilizing my business credentials and a bit of social engineering with the bank's automated verification system, I managed to gain access to the digital statement history for that specific card over the past 3 years. When the PDF statements finally loaded on my laptop screen at my design studio, I felt the air leave my lungs. There were absolutely no charges for rural bait shops, rugged camping gear, or remote gas stations in the backwoods of Maine. Instead, the statements were a glittering paper trail of a high society romance. The expenses from the second week of June over the last several years were staggering. 5-star oceanfront seafood restaurants, boutique jewelry shops on Main Street, luxury spa treatments, and a massive 5-figure charge at an elite yacht charter company in Hyannis. Thousands upon thousands of dollars were vanishing into the Atlantic coastline every single summer. He wasn't roughing it in a log cabin. He was living like royalty. The final crushing blow came on Friday morning, the day of departure. Mark went through his usual pathetic routine with the precision of a seasoned Broadway actor. He packed his weathered canvas duffel bag right in front of me, making sure I saw him toss in his old flannel shirts, his heavy hiking boots, and a tackle box. It was a grotesque, insulting costume for the performance he was about to put on. "I'm really gonna miss you, babe," he murmured, wrapping his arms around my waist and pulling me into a tight embrace. He felt warm, he smelled familiar, and yet he felt like an absolute terrifying stranger. "I'll miss you too. Please be careful out there in the woods." I forced the words out, my lips curling into a practiced, bright smile, despite the emotional acid burning in my throat. He gave me one last, lingering kiss on the forehead, loaded his duffel bag into the back of his dented SUV, and drove away at precisely 8 a.m. I stood at the window, watching his taillights disappear down our tree-lined street. I gave him a 30-minute head start, just enough time for him to hit the highway. Then, the gloves came off. I grabbed my own pre-packed overnight bag, locked the front door of our beautiful, lie-filled home, and walked out to my car. I opened the tracking app on my phone. The AirTag, which I had incredibly carefully sliced open the lining of his duffel bag to conceal inside the night before, was already moving rapidly. I pulled up behind the steering wheel, started the engine, and opened my GPS. He wasn't heading north toward the dense forests of Maine. The little silver icon was moving steadily, predictably, and aggressively southeast toward the coast. The chase was officially on. The drive to Cape Cod was a descent into pure psychological horror. The New England summer weather was absolutely gorgeous, bright, cloudless blue skies, and a sparkling sun that felt like a mockery of the dark, suffocating turbulence tearing my chest apart. I stayed miles behind him on Route 6, keeping a safe, calculated distance so his rearview mirror would never catch a glimpse of my car. I didn't need to see him. I had the tracking app open on my dashboard, watching that little silver dot glide smoothly down the highway, pulling me closer and closer to a truth I wasn't sure I was strong enough to survive. Around 1:30 p.m., the icon finally stopped moving. It settled deep within an ultra-exclusive, gated coastal enclave in Chatham, right on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean. When I finally pulled into the town, the air changed. The scent of pine and exhaust was replaced by the crisp, salty breeze of the ocean, a smell that normally brought me peace, but now made me want to throw up. I drove slowly past manicured lawns, towering hydrangeas, and sweeping multi-million-dollar ocean views, until my GPS whispered that I had arrived at the exact coordinates. I parked my car half a block away, completely hidden behind a row of massive, overgrown privacy hedges, and walked the remaining distance on foot. The property was breathtaking, a sprawling, gray-shingled Nantucket-style estate with massive panoramic windows facing the open water. And there, parked right in the center of the pristine gravel driveway, was Mark's dented, weathered SUV. It looked completely ridiculous, like a piece of junk sitting next to a flawless ice-white Mercedes convertible. I crept quietly up the side path of the property, the crushed shells beneath my sneakers sounding like glass breaking in my ears. My heart was hammering against my ribs so violently, I was genuinely terrified they would hear it. The massive beachside deck came into view as I cleared the edge of the house. I dropped low, crouching behind a beautifully stacked stone retaining wall, and looked up. There he was, Mark. But he wasn't wearing his old flannel shirt or his mud-stained hiking boots. He was dressed in crisp, expensive linen shorts and a designer polo shirt, looking like he belonged on the cover of a luxury yacht magazine. He was laughing, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he held a crystal flute of champagne. Standing right next to him, laughing at something he said, was a stunning, elegant woman in her late 20s, her blonde hair catching the ocean breeze. On her left ring finger, a massive pear-cut diamond ring caught the sunlight. I watched in absolute paralyzing horror as Mark leaned down and kissed her lips with a familiar, casual tenderness that made my stomach turn inside out. But the real, soul-crushing blow came just a few seconds later. A glass door slid open, and a little girl, no older than 4 years old, came running out onto the deck wearing a matching white sundress. She squealed with pure delight, throwing her tiny arms up and yelling, "Daddy! Daddy, look at the big boat!" Mark caught her seamlessly, lifting her high into the air and spinning her around with a massive, unadulterated smile. A look of pure, radiant happiness I had never once seen on his face in our 10 years of marriage. He didn't just have a girlfriend. He had an entire second family. A wife, a daughter, a completely separate universe built entirely on the bleeding carcass of our marriage. The grief hit me first, a massive, suffocating wave that threatened to physically knock me to my knees right there in the dirt behind the stone wall. For a split second, I couldn't breathe. My throat closed up, and tears pricked the corners of my eyes as I watched my husband of 10 years hold another woman's child and look into another woman's eyes with total devotion. But then, almost instantly, the sorrow was entirely consumed by a cold, blinding, razor-sharp rage. 7 years of absolute lies. 7 years of being left behind in Connecticut, playing the role of the sweet, trusting, supportive wife, while he funded a secret seaside paradise using money that belonged to our family. Every sweet text he'd ever sent me, every anniversary dinner, every "I love you" felt like a direct slap in the face. I didn't cry. I wiped the single tear from my cheek, straightened my designer jacket, and stood up from behind the stone wall. I walked around the side of the house, my sneakers crunching purposefully against the gravel, and marched straight up the grand wooden stairs leading to the oceanfront deck. The casual, rhythmic clinking of their champagne glasses froze instantly. Mark was mid-sentence, laughing at something the blonde woman had said, when his eyes casually scanned the deck and landed squarely on me. The change in him was instantaneous. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked like he was about to faint. His jaw literally dropped, and his eyes widened into dinner plates. He looked like he had just seen a ghost standing in front of him. His fingers completely lost their grip, and his crystal flute slipped, crashing onto the hardwood deck and shattering into 100 pieces, spilling champagne across the floor. "Elena?" he whispered, his voice cracking so badly it barely carried over the sound of the ocean waves. The blonde woman looked between us, her perfect brow furrowing in deep, immediate confusion. She set her own glass down on a patio table. "Mark? Babe, who is this? Is this one of your clients from the firm?" I took 3 steps forward, stepping right over the shattered glass, my eyes locked entirely on her. "Hi, I'm Elena. And no, I'm not a client. I'm Mark's wife, his actual legal wife of 10 years. We live together in Connecticut." The woman's face turned absolutely pale. She took a step back, her hand instinctively flying to her chest, covering the massive diamond ring. "What? No, that's impossible. Mark is a venture capitalist. He travels to New York for heavy corporate meetings during the week. We've been married for 5 years. This is our home. This is our daughter, Lily." "He's a senior financial analyst in Connecticut, sweetie," I said, my voice terrifyingly calm, steady, and devoid of any emotion. "And he's been sleeping in my bed every single night for the last decade, except for this specific weekend every single June, which he told me was a solo fishing trip in the deep woods of Maine." Mark scrambled toward me, his hands shaking in the air, as if he could physically block the truth from coming out. "Elena, please, just stop. Let's go outside. Let's walk down to the beach and talk about this. Chloe, please, just give me a second. Let me explain." "Don't you dare touch me," I snapped, stepping back with a look of pure disgust. Chloe looked at Mark, horrific realization dawning on her face as she saw the sheer, unadulterated terror in his eyes. She looked at his guilt, and then she looked back at me. You told me your entire family died in a horrific car accident right before we met. You told me that's why no one came to our wedding. You told me you had no one left." The massive web of lies was collapsing in real time, right in front of the Atlantic Ocean. Mark looked like a cornered, rabid animal, his eyes darting frantically between his 2 wives, completely and utterly speechless. The sheer, calculated scale of his sociopathy was staggering. He hadn't just cheated on me. He had systematically constructed a completely fabricated identity, building 2 entirely separate lives on a foundation of absolute cruelty. He stood there in his expensive linen clothes, completely naked, exposed, and ruined. I didn't stay to listen to his pathetic, stuttering excuses. I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving them in the middle of a screaming match that was tearing through that expensive beachfront estate like a hurricane. But if Mark thought I was just going to go back to Connecticut, cry into a pint of ice cream, and file for a standard divorce, he severely underestimated who he was dealing with. He had systematically dismantled my life, and I was going to make absolutely sure his came crashing down in a way he could never recover from. The second I got into my car, the emotional haze vanished, replaced by cold, calculated execution. I didn't call friends. I called a top-tier forensic accountant and the most ruthless divorce attorney in the state. Over the next 3 weeks, we went to war behind closed doors. Mark thought he was a genius at hiding money, but when a professional digs into corporate routing numbers with a vengeful wife guiding them, nothing stays buried. What we uncovered was 1,000,000 times worse than simple infidelity. Mark wasn't just using his hefty salary to fund his second life. He was embezzling massive sums of money from his firm's high-profile corporate clients. He had been quietly funneling the stolen cash through a complex web of shell companies. And the sickest part? Every single one of those dummy corporations was registered under Chloe's legal name, without her knowing. He had set her up to be his ultimate financial human shield. I didn't hesitate. I packaged every single spreadsheet, bank routing slip, and forged signature we found and handed it directly to the FBI and the board of directors at his firm. The karma was swift, brutal, and beautifully public. Within a month, federal agents swarmed his pristine corporate office in Connecticut. Mark was led out of the building in handcuffs in front of everyone he spent years trying to impress. Because the shell companies were in Chloe's name, the feds immediately froze all her accounts, and that luxury Cape Cod estate, which had been purchased entirely with dirty, embezzled money, was seized by the government. Chloe, realizing she had been completely weaponized as a legal scapegoat by the man she loved, turned on him instantly. She cooperated fully with the prosecution, handing over every text, email, and scrap of paper she had ever kept. Mark was hit with a mountain of federal charges: grand larceny, wire fraud, and tax evasion. He lost his high-paying job, his spotless reputation, his freedom, and both of his families in one swift stroke. He was facing up to 25 years in a federal penitentiary, left with absolutely nothing but the orange jumpsuit on his back. With the divorce finalized and Mark locked away awaiting trial, I finally felt like I could breathe again. I decided to pack up our Connecticut home and sell it, to start completely fresh. While clearing out the dark, dusty corners of the attic, I found an old, locked steel briefcase belonging to Mark. The key was long gone, but at this point, I had absolutely no reservations about breaking it open. I grabbed a heavy crowbar from the garage and snapped the lock with one hard, echoing crack. Inside were neat stacks of legal documents, foreign passports, and offshore bank statements. But at the very bottom of the briefcase was a small, black, leather-bound journal. I opened it, fully expecting to read love notes about Chloe or calculations for his embezzlement schemes. Instead, the very first page read, "Project Vance, Phase 2 complete." I flipped through the pages, my heart stopping as I read the dates. The journal didn't start 5 years ago when he met Chloe. It started 12 years ago, 2 full years before Mark and I had ever even met. As I read his typed notes, a sickening reality began to take shape. Mark wasn't a financial analyst who stumbled into a second family. He was a deep-cover corporate saboteur, hired by a rival firm to infiltrate my father's logistics empire. My father had passed away 8 years ago, leaving his massive estate and corporate shares to me, which Mark had been quietly liquidating and transferring offshore for a decade. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. I turned to the final entry, dated just 1 week before his arrest. Elena is getting close. Found the AirTag I intentionally left in the laundry room. She will follow the breadcrumbs to Cape Cod exactly as planned. Chloe and the kid will take the fall for the frozen assets, hiding the primary offshore accounts. Elena will file for divorce, separating her assets from mine before the federal investigation hits the firm. Once the smoke clears and I cut a deal with the feds, the real money is safe in Switzerland. She thinks she won. She thinks it was karma. But she played her part perfectly. I dropped the journal, the cold leather notebook slipping through my trembling fingers and hitting the dusty attic floor with a dull thud. I stood frozen, looking out the small attic window at the empty driveway below. The FBI hadn't caught Mark because of my clever detective work. My brilliant forensic accountant hadn't outsmarted him. Mark had meticulously orchestrated his own downfall from the very beginning. He had used me to expose himself, using our bitter, high-profile divorce as a perfect legal firewall to protect tens of millions of dollars from being seized by the government. He had willingly sacrificed a few years of his freedom in a low-security prison just to guarantee a lifetime of absolute billionaire luxury abroad once he got out. I had spent weeks feeling like the ultimate mastermind, the fiercely independent woman who had righteously ruined her cheating husband's life. But as I sat entirely alone in that empty, hollow house, the terrifying, crushing truth finally settled deep into my bones. I wasn't the author of his destruction. I wasn't the hero of this story.
I was just the final unsuspecting piece of his puzzle, playing my part exactly on cue.